So this is where we'll go. So thank you, Shabana. Thank you so much for joining us for Global Thoughts. I really appreciate it. And I want to thank everyone else who has joined us. This is something that we do occasionally, where we get a global perspective from someone. And I think I'm pleased to have Shabana come here and talk to us about the work that she has been doing with Sola, the School of Leadership in Afghanistan. And I'm hoping we can have some questions and answers. So she's going to speak for however long she wants to, maybe 15, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, that's fine. And then the rest of the program will be dedicated to questions and answers. So the only thing I have to ask you all is don't let me be the only one asking questions, because that's not fun. I'm sure you have some questions. And again, if you have any comments, share them. You can, if someone is speaking, just share the comment on the chat, okay? And we'll get things going. I do want to say one thing, Shabana, that Abroadia is going to be donating, making a contribution to Sola. Okay. Thank you again for your time. If anyone is interested in that, I have uploaded the file to the chat room. You can take a look and see about making contributions or forwarding it to anyone. This is a worthwhile cause, and I like it because it goes right to the organization. You don't go through a third party company or whatever. So again, thank you, Shabana, and I believe we will be working together on many future occasions. So welcome again, everyone. Shabana, so let's get started. So tell us a little bit, how did Sola come about? How did it start?
Sounds great. Thank you so much, Tom, for the invitation to speak with your students. I also really appreciate everyone on this call for your interest. I'll try to keep this very conversational and also keep the format more in a storytelling way so that hopefully I don't bore you. But to answer the question about how I started Sola, or the School of Leadership Afghanistan, I think for me it was a very personal decision, in so many ways informed by my own experience growing up in Afghanistan. I am very aware that when people hear about Afghanistan, the things and the thoughts that come to mind are not necessarily the positive ones. They're all associated with war and bomb blasts and unfortunately terrorism and lack of rights for women and girls. And some of these things, for instance, lack of rights for girls and women, are true. But there's also such a different side to Afghanistan that people are not aware of, that mainstream media does not necessarily focus on. I start telling the story about Sola by really focusing on my own childhood growing up in Kabul city. I was born and raised in Afghanistan. I was roughly 6 years old when the Taliban regime took over the country. This was back in 1996. I'm 30 now. And for the next 5-6 years, education for girls was illegal. Um, Girls could not get educated. Women could not go outside the home for work. And there were also a lot more restrictions imposed on people. For instance, people were not allowed to watch TV or listen to music. Men were forced to grow beard. They were forced to wear traditional clothing. And Afghanistan has always been at this crossroads. So it's a very diverse country. It has a very rich history. And so a lot of these restrictions by the Taliban regime were quite strange and foreign to people in the country. Um, I consider myself one of the extremely lucky and privileged women, particularly Afghan women, because living under the Taliban regime, it was so normal at that time not to educate girls because, first of all, it was criminalized. But my parents valued education so deeply that they decided to risk their lives and our lives to send me and my sisters to a secret school. And when I talk about secret school, typically when you talk about a school, the mental image in our head is of, a huge building and, lots of field around it, a known location. But in under the Taliban regime, secret schools were really a small space operated some out of someone's home. So typically out of a living room or a corner of their house that was quiet, but definitely inside the house. And it was completely secret. The one I attended a few of them in our neighborhood, but the one that I attended for the longest with my sister was run by an Afghan woman who was a high school principal before the Taliban regime. She had three daughters and two sons. Her three daughters, two of them were at the medical university at Kabul University. They were students in their, I believe, at that time, second and third year. And their youngest daughter had just finished high school. And so they could no longer go to university to continue with their education. And those three sisters became our teachers. And the twin brothers, they basically were the neighborhood watch. Their job was to sit outside their house at that local convenience store around the corner, and making sure that they knew that the neighbors were always on board and no one was planning to report them to the Taliban. And the mother, so the former high school principal, she would sit on this window shelf right in that one particular room that was turned into our school. And she would tell us and remind all of us on daily basis that once we left her house, we needed to walk away as fast as we could. And if we were ever stopped by the Taliban or investigated, that we were to take them to our home. And the reason being, less people could be killed at our house than in this particular school, and that our parents would be more responsible in terms of responding to them. Um, every time I talk about this experience, I find it so shocking in a sense that as kids at that time, we kind of accepted this, that was to be our normal day to day. I had accepted that it was illegal for girls to get educated. I had internalized that it was a crime to educate girls, but we did it anyways because my parents felt differently about it. So I went to secret school not because I really cared about getting educated. It's tough sometimes to admit that, but that was the reality. I went to secret school because I knew that it was important for my parents, and that they wanted me to get this education. And so when I really think about this and put this in the context of Afghanistan, how even to this day, it's so easy for people to ignore girls' right to education, I feel extremely lucky and privileged. Um, Fast forward, 9/11 happened, and um, schools opened. And I'll come back to that experience in a bit. But when I was 15 years old, I came to the US as a high school exchange student. I was 15. I randomly was placed with a wonderful host family in Wisconsin, in the middle of nowhere. And there, for the first time in my life, I experienced what it meant for girls to feel completely normal about having equal access to education. Um, for the first time, I experienced what it meant for educated girls not to feel special or particularly grateful to their parents or anyone else for being allowed to get an education. And while parents and educators always complain about how they don't like it when students or their children take their education for granted, I found a strange beauty in the fact that girls particularly could take their education for granted. And I wanted that for girls in Afghanistan. And so this is what we need. Once we arrive at this particular experience for girls in Afghanistan, Afghanistan will be a peaceful place. And I was convinced of it at that young age. I mentioned this also to talk about how powerful it is to get out of your comfort zone. I know people always talk about it and it sounds so cliche, but I know that my life transformed when I left Afghanistan, when I came to a place that was completely different than Afghanistan. It allowed me to look at Afghanistan from an outsider's perspective. It gave me that kind of like a view on a much higher level of looking down at my country, my location, religion, culture, way of life, people, situation, and realize uh, that there are so many things that I would have never questioned or learned about had I not left the country. But kind of going back to the year immediately after the Taliban, and I think that in my mind, as I reflect back in my experience, kind of was that moment at that young age when I felt that I had this obligation and a commitment that later became Sola. Right immediately after the Taliban regime uh, in winter of 2001, an interim government was formed, and obviously the Taliban had burned um, all the records for female students. So the interim government had no way of knowing about girls and their educational level or status. So they made an announcement and said that Afghan girls could go to the nearest public school to take a placement test and place into whatever grade they felt comfortable placing into. So it was really up to the student. Um, and I had just finished sixth grade in secret school. So I took that placement test, wanting to place into seventh grade. The day the results were being announced, I remember thousands of girls in this particular school that I attended had come to the school. And because there were so many girls, more than they had expected to return to school. Um, so, for instance, let's say in seventh grade, there were 900 students. They couldn't put them all in the same classroom for the subject. So what they did was they divided the students into clusters of 60 to 70 girls per class cluster, and then those girls stayed in the same classroom and the teachers rotated, so it made it easier for the school to manage it. But because so many girls were out of school for such a long time, the school administrators decided uh, to announce girls who had scored the highest as class representatives. Instead of putting them all in one class, they divided these girls across different grades, so that these class representatives then, in class periods where teacher didn't show up or they didn't have a teacher, or they hadn't hired a teacher yet, that these girls could tutor their classmates. So my name was announced as one of the class representatives. And I felt, so proud and excited that I was chosen as a class representative, and just started making my way to the front of the line. And as soon as the teacher looked at me and said, "Are you Shabana?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, "Oh no." As you can imagine, I wasn't expecting that kind of a reaction. And I didn't quite understand why she would say that, but I was trying to be polite. And uh, in Afghanistan, you really do not challenge your teacher. There's that typical hierarchy that exists, and we are raised and told that we are to respect our teachers more than we respect our parents. And so I didn't say anything. I stood next to my teacher, and as soon as I faced my classmates, I had the exact same feeling. I could feel my stomach tightening up. I realized that more than 90 some percent, well above 96% of my classmates were at least 6 years older than I was. And that these were girls who were returning to school where they had left off. And thanks to all the risks that my parents took. I was, you know, in an Afghan sense, I was quote unquote ahead of my classmates. By international standards, I was 12 and about to start seventh grade, and so perfectly normal age. But by Afghan standards, I was suddenly 6 years ahead of my classmates, simply because of that lived realities. And for the first time in my life, I realized how amazing my parents were. Um, I grew up under the Taliban regime thinking and believing that my parents were really cruel, that they were unkind. How could they risk their lives and our lives and send us to secret school knowing that it was endangering us, that if we were caught, we would be easily killed? And I always struggled with that. And there were a lot of times when my parents would try to convince us that education was the best investment. Is the one thing that no one could take away from us. It didn't mean anything to me at that time until that day I was standing in front of my classmates, and suddenly I felt enormously grateful, but also incredibly ashamed. Yeah, grateful because all I saw the result of all the sacrifices my parents and I made. But I felt ashamed because I gave my parents such a hard time, and I didn't understand as I was going through it the value of that experience. So all I wanted to do was really leave the school, go home, hug my parents, and thank them for what they had done. But I had to be there. So I remember being 12. It was just beginning of spring, not quite yet, and promising myself that just like my parents had always told us, I would use my education to live a purposeful life. And being aware of your privilege without someone else telling you that you are privileged, at an age 12, um, knowing how powerful education can be in your life at that young age, it is quite transformative. I later on, when I started my undergraduate experience um, in the U.S., uh, I was 17. This was 2007. Another thing that really shocked me was during orientation, the president of our college said something along the lines of how only 2% of Americans are lucky enough to have access to this kind of education, referring to the liberal arts. And the same year, the UN published a report that indicated that only 6% of women in Afghanistan have a college degree. And, studying in a really prestigious higher education institution in the US, knowing that I was already a member of a small minority of privileged Afghan women, there was a lot of pressure that I felt. I felt really privileged and out of place and guilty. And I constantly asked and myself, and questioned why I was there and how did I get to be so lucky to be there, and what is it that I can do. At the end of my freshman year of college, I co-founded Sola. I actually co-founded it with an American. And the funny thing was that as an Afghan, I was in the US, and as an American, he was in Afghanistan. He was a remarkable human being, and unfortunately, 3 years ago, he passed away. But at that time, in his words, he flunked out retirement and found his second home in Afghanistan. Um, we both believed in the power of education, and especially in providing educational opportunities for young uh, Afghans who have the potential and who will be able to use their education beyond the benefit for themselves. In the beginning, Sola was actually a scholarship program. So we helped, since we established Sola in 2008, to date, we have helped more than 80 young Afghans gain scholarship opportunities to study in the US and other countries. But in 2012, I made a decision to turn Sola into a full-fledged boarding school, and I was very fortunate that my co-founder was very supportive. He had said it to me then, and then since then he had repeated it quite frequently that um, solutions to Afghanistan's problem cannot be imposed from the outside, and it has to come from educated Afghans, especially Afghan women. And he stood by it and he practiced it. He really stepped aside and supported me and my team to take this forward. And the reason I wanted to turn Sola into a boarding school was because I believe that the more sustainable approach was to, instead of sending students from Afghanistan outside of Afghanistan to gain access to quality education, we need to bring quality education to them to Afghanistan. But both of us also believed in the power of studying abroad. Both of us believed in how transformative that is for a young person. I believed in it because my own experience was a living proof of it. He believed in it because for him, it was very important that Muslims from Afghanistan would actually come to the US, live with Americans, and by being physically present in the US while studying would actually teach Americans about who Afghans are and who Muslims are. And so one of the things that we did was, in order to kind of maintain this aspect of the Sola experience was, our academic year starts in late March and goes through mid-December. So winter is off. And so during that time off, instead of sending our students home for the whole time, we actually bring them back to campus and for a whole class. So typically a group of students who are finishing 8th grade and are entering 9th grade, we're taking the entire class to a neighboring country for a study abroad experience, a mini version, a 1 month long version. And we have, for the past 5 years, we have actually been hosted by a few different institutions in India, and the girls learn a whole variety of things. Oftentimes, we work in collaboration with my alma mater, Middlebury College. A professor and a few students come there for the January term in the US, and they work with our students. But also, we have done ad hoc things. In 1 year, in partnership with Google, we offered our students coding lessons. Another year, a classmate of mine who worked for NPR, she came and um, offered workshops on digital storytelling. So our girls learned those skills, and then they interviewed each other and told each other stories. And the girls have also learned how to swim because the school has a swimming pool, and then they have also done a lot of cultural shows and cooked for the host community. And these experiences have been phenomenal because every time these girls come back home, um, most often they're the first in their family to travel outside of Afghanistan. And so when they go back to their communities, they suddenly go from being just another girl in the community to becoming the person in their village, the first person who's traveled outside of Afghanistan, and everyone is there wanting to learn from them how the experience was. How was it to be on a plane and be in a different country? How was India? What was the food like? What was different? What was similar? And I've heard the girls talk about when they come back to school, some of them say, I got so sick and tired of answering the same questions from different people. But my parents kept reminding me that because I'm the first person who's traveled, I need to be kind and tell people what they want to know. So I kind of went about Sola in an interesting way. But from 2012, when we decided to become a boarding school, it took us a few years. We finally turned into a full-fledged boarding school in 2016. That means in 2016, when we admitted students, they were not admitted with the intention that we would send them abroad, but they were admitted with the intention that they will actually study at Sola and graduate from Sola High School. We initially thought Sola would be a 4-year high school, so the 9th through 12th. But we quickly realized that girls who were coming from provinces, academically, they were performing at a much lower level. So we decided to start the Sola experience in 6th grade. In sixth grade, the girls are still seen as girls and not women, so it's easier to convince their families to let them board. Developmentally, it's an exciting time to work with young people, but academically, it gave us uh, both time and opportunity to address academic gaps for girls before they reached high school. So since 2016, we have admitted um, students only into sixth grade, and the very first cohort, they're now in 10th grade, and they will be our very first graduating class in 2022. We have 80 students representing 26 of the 34 provinces in Afghanistan. And our goal is to expand the school to more than 250 students in the next 5-10 years, and representing all of Afghanistan, all 34 provinces. So that's what Sola is about. Sola can be a typical, I can tell you stories actually from Sola that would make it look like a very typical school, typical boarding school for girls in the US. But I could also tell you stories that will really speak to the bravery and courage of the girls and their families, for the risks that they continue to take. Even in today's Afghanistan, it's no longer illegal to educate girls, but some of the challenges remain. And these girls and their families demonstrate such bravery in continuing to stay focused and to invest in their daughters. I'm going to finish off with reading a very short piece that our girls wrote recently. So, as you may be aware, the month of October is often a month-long celebration of girls, but particularly October 11th is International Day of the Girl, that the UN called in a few years ago. And it's an opportunity to celebrate girls around the world, and highlight the importance of investment in girls and their education. So for this October, we asked our girls a very simple question. We asked them, what do you want to tell the world about Afghan girls? And our students wrote some remarkable responses to this question. But one of the ones that I found so beautiful, she titled it "The Fighter for the Equal Future." Today is the day I always tell myself I'm proud to be a girl, a student, and a defender for my people. I study in Afghanistan, the country that the majority think is backward. As an educated girl, proudly I can say that the time has changed, mindsets have changed, people started traveling, and girls can take further steps. Strong girls like me have shown that the world is ours. Don't see me as useless. Don't push me away. Don't tell me that I can't, because I am the girl that will change your negative thoughts. I'm studying in a school with brave girls that are from all around Afghanistan. These girls are proud to save lives, teach, draw, fight, and we can bring equal treatment for everyone. Yes, we can do all the housework, but besides that, we can handle the heavy problems that can come on us every time. Today, there is no discrimination and disability. We can mix up the culture and we can roll the future. There is no way to stop this. You are still living. You have the ability. You are the fighter for equal future. So this is just an example of, and this was written in English by our students. One of the things we do when the girls come to Sola in sixth grade, we give them a few weeks to get over homesickness and get adjusted to living in a boarding school. And then they sign a language pledge to speak English at all times. We don't even ask them, actually we used to, but we no longer even ask them if they speak English when they fill out the application, because it doesn't matter. They will learn the language when they come to us. And because the environment is such that the girls, we have established layers and layers of support that comes from the girls themselves. The young girls learn English by the end of their first year at Sola. So by the time they finish their sixth grade, they are fluent speakers of English, simply because they're not allowed to speak anything but English in the dorm. and these girls want to talk to each other. And so they learn the language very quickly. And one of the things that I attribute this to is the big sister, little sister program we have. When the sixth graders come to Sola, the very first person they meet on campus is their big sister. And so we also geographically diversify this on purpose. So if a girl comes from northern Afghanistan, her big sister might be from either western or southern Afghanistan, and vice versa. And so this way, the focus remains directly on the young little sister and having the honor of being a big sister for an incoming sixth grader. And the girls always do such an amazing job of supporting one another. So I'm going to finish there. I hope I've raised more questions for you, and I hope please feel free to ask any questions you have about Sola, the school, what we do, or even just going back to my personal experience. If you have any questions, please. And thank you.
Thank you very much, Shabana. That was great. Actually, it really was very, very good. Okay, I open it to anyone here. Any questions for Shabana?
Yeah, I wanted to thank Shabana also. That was very, very inspiring and wonderful to hear about your path through all of that. And I wanted to make one comment and then ask one question. I really enjoyed at the beginning of your story where you talked about the role that the brothers took in guarding the school that you had gone to. And often in dialogue about feminist reforms, there is kind of this gap of like, what are men supposed to do? What are boys supposed to do to help these reforms? And I really like that narrative and sort of sharing the ideas of this is not just something for women to do for women, it's something for everyone to do. So I like that a lot. And one question is, you had talked about when you went to the school in, I believe it was Wisconsin, that you first realized that the girls there were kind of taking it for granted that they would have the same educational rights and opportunities as boys. And I wonder how, as educators, you promote the view for girls and young women that is something to in some ways be taken for granted, but also to retain the obligation to retain the structural issues that allow women in the future to have those same kinds of rights. So kind of having that double consciousness that it's not that long ago that maybe these rights weren't there, and that we can both enjoy them, but also have to be responsible for the future, realizing that those haven't always been around, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Thank you. About your first comment, actually, this morning I was giving another talk to a group of doctorate degree students at Arizona State University. And we were talking about innovation and development, and the role of men came, and a couple of speakers. So today happens to be November 19th happens to be the International Day of Men. And it's meant to both talk about but promote positive masculinity. And there was a comment about how there shouldn't even be a day for men because every day and all days are about men. And I took I don't know I took an issue with that. I said, actually, if we're talking, and when we're talking about women's issues, when we're talking about girls' rights, if we find ourselves talking to just another group of women, we're in deep trouble because we're just preaching to the choir. If the issue is that men pose obstacles or in way of girls and their opportunities, or for women, then we have to be reaching across and finding allies in men, because the reality is that there are men who are allies. There are men who lift up women in their lives, and we need to be speaking with them, and we need to be giving them the voice and platform, and using their help to convince other men to do the same, and to show men that by supporting women in their lives, it doesn't take away from their masculinity. Or by leveling girls up, we're not leveling men or boys down. And that's an important message that we need to communicate across. I always talk about the role my father played in in my life. I mean, when I graduated from Middlebury, the very first thing my father said was, "When are you going to apply for your master's, and when are you going to do your PhD?" And so that's his expectation. When in Afghanistan, typically the expectation is you finished your undergraduate, you're almost too late to get married. But it was, I'm always aware of how different my father is, and as a result, he has opened up many opportunities for me. I see it in the fathers of our girls. We have fathers who are actually risking their lives to educate their daughters. I know of a brother who dropped out of school and runs a rickshaw, a version of taxi, to support his sister to go to school. Because he said, and I was so shocked when I learned about that, and I said, "Well, why would you do that?" He said to me, and he was a bit embarrassed. He's like, "Look, I know I'm not very good in education, but my sister seems to be so talented. So why waste that opportunity on me when only one of us can study? It should be her, because she's talented, she's hardworking, and I decided to drop out work and support her." It's important to talk about those stories because it opens up the door for more men to join, and then it becomes an opportunity to truly talk about why girls' education is beneficial. It's not just beneficial for girls and women; it's actually beneficial for the family. It includes boys and men, for the society, and again, it includes everyone. So very important. Now, coming back to your question about what do we do to make sure that these girls are both, they have the double consciousness. Honestly speaking, we're still at a phase in Afghanistan where you don't have to do much for a girl to be super aware of her privilege. Unfortunately, after years of investment by the international community and the US in particular, 70% of girls in Afghanistan are not in school. That's a lot of girls. So 2 out of 3 girls are not in school. And believe me, that one girl is aware. So at Sola, we actually don't have to. I have never felt the need to remind the girls how lucky they are. If anything, I try, I try to do the opposite, is to reduce their feeling sense of guilt for being lucky. But saying, this is your time. You are lucky in a sense that you've been allowed to focus your time on yourself. Take full advantage of it. Invest in yourself. That's what I tell the girls. I say, invest in yourself, take maximum advantage of the time you have at Sola, because this is your time, and you can do whatever you want, however you want to study. And the girls take the message to heart. Another reason I know that they are super aware of their privilege, and it is when they go home for the winter break. More than half of our girls either open up tutoring centers at home where they tell their neighbors that their daughters can come to them and they can study with them. Several of our girls in southern Afghanistan, where schools are still in session in southern Afghanistan, we follow 2 different academic calendars. They go and they enroll as volunteer teachers in public schools, and they double the number of female teachers because already the school has only 4 female teachers, and these 4 girls go and teach there. It doubles the number of female teachers, and the girls believe that these girls who've come from Kabul, they teach the subjects even better. I have a girl who told me that she dedicated her time off to tutor her mom, to help her learn how to read and write, because her mom grew up in war and she never realized her dream of getting educated, but instead focused on her daughters to get educated. And she said, "I don't want my mom to die with her dream unrealized. I want her to learn how to read and write." And so she's dedicating her time to it. So when young girls engage in these kinds of initiatives entirely on their own without me or someone else at Sola telling them, it shows that they are actually so aware of the privilege. And I know, I'm convinced, maybe I'm biased, who knows, but I'm convinced that these girls are going to do amazing things with their education.
Salam, Shabana John. My name's Hila. I have a question as well.
Great to.
Likewise. I'm a former student of Tom's. I studied in Cuba under his tutelage. So first time, I just want to say thank you so much for the work that you're doing. You know, I think everyone in the Afghan diaspora, we're all so motivated and so committed to helping our home country. And we have these really great visions, but I know sometimes it's much harder said than done, you know, to be in the field and doing the work that you're doing. So I just want to say thank you for the work that you're doing.
Thank you.
My question is, so in addition to all the didactic, you know, education that you provide these young women, you know, math, history, geography, how do you try to inculcate softer skills as well, like courage and self-confidence, or for that matter, teamwork and empathy and leadership?
Yep. This is actually very core to Sola experience, and in fact, I believe we have done a much better job with these skills than we are at the moment with the core curriculum. We're getting there, but with I mentioned earlier, so we have actually, Sola is becoming more of a, not becoming, but it is by design, it has always been a student-run school. Mainly because at the moment, our girls understand better what it takes to be in a boarding school than our educators. Our educators have not gone to a boarding school. So the girls are actually more on top of it than their educators. So we have layers of support that are entirely run by the girls. So the earlier when I mentioned the Big Sister, Little Sister program, that is a first opportunity for girls to both practice leadership, but also to look out for someone else, like practicing empathy and kindness. We always talk about, remember when you were sixth grader, how did it feel? And if you felt that you were not supported enough, show the younger grades differently. And they always empathize. So I always see older girls trying to point to things and teaching the girls constantly. You know, they look at it and say chowki and then say chair, and teach the girls English that way. Same thing when the girls feel homesick. The first person they go to is their dorm leader. So again, it's another position within Sola that girls get to be their room leader. It's another opportunity. And we've purposefully, even though our space is really tight, we have separated the middle school dorm from the high school dorm to increase opportunities for leadership, both in middle school level and high school level. In terms of confidence, this is another, I think, amazing place where these girls really blossom into themselves, and because of the opportunities created. One of the things that we do, which is mandatory, is daily exercise. Whether it's simply warm-ups and yoga, or they now have diversified it to playing volleyball and some version of softball, dodgeball that they have created themselves. But I remember in the very beginning, when the girls come to us, they are really, really shy, and or at least they're not very, physically active. In an Afghan society, especially once you hit puberty, you're told to cover and speak slowly and not laugh loudly, etc. And here they come to us and we ask them to do yoga, and yoga is all about stretching, and the girls find it so silly. They laugh hysterically. They cannot stop laughing. They think it's bizarre that we're asking them to do all of this. And then a month after they have joined us, they come to us and ask if they can play music while they're doing yoga. So these are, little moments. Also, outside of this, we have capped our class size to 16. We don't have rows. All the classes are circular or a half circle. And so participation, everyone is at the same level. Participation matters. And every girl gets an opportunity to be able to present during the weekly assembly. Oftentimes, it's group presentations of the projects they're working on, and they present it really proudly. And some of the things I say sound so typical in schools in the US, but in Afghanistan, it's really not commonplace. So for instance, we are really committed to our teacher parent conferences. We ideally try to have it twice a year, but because of students and where they come from and the challenges of travel, we try to make sure that at least their families come in once a year. And this is another opportunity the girls have to showcase what they have learned, whether it's in the arts or other subjects. When we hired our art teacher, we didn't hire an art teacher, we hired an artist.
Okay.
And it was difficult for me at first to convince this artist to become a teacher. And she said, I am not taught, I'm an artist. Why would I become a teacher? I said, you can continue to be an artist. Please come and teach at Sola, because we want to make sure that the girls are inspired by someone who's truly an artist. And she did exactly that. She has inspired our girls to really express themselves. If you look into if you look on Sola's website, my most recent blog post is about the International Day of the Girl. And the girls not only wrote um, a response to the question I posted them, but they actually drew pictures and paintings, and they're very artistic in how they express themselves. And none of them are apologetic about talking publicly. They are actually quite eager to participate and speak. We've been doing these virtual sessions with students in the US, and every week they are so eager to talk to their fellow, quote unquote classmates in the US. Yeah.
That's awesome. That's terrific. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks for the question.
Certainly.
Any other questions? No other questions. I can't think of anything because you did you covered everything in your chat, and then the other questions and did I just I think I just want to thank you again for joining us, Shabana. This was I was very touched actually just listening to this. It's
thank you.
Very
Thank
poignant.
you
I think I can't speak for the others, but I will say this: out of all the global thoughts sessions that we've had that Abradia has hosted, this is one that's impacted me the most. Thank you.
Thank you
I think
for your kind words.
it's a very human story, and I think it's a story, it's a narrative that's missing in this world these days. So thank you very much for your efforts, and thank you very much for your time. If there are no other questions, like I said, Abradia will be making a contribution to Sola. I did put that link in the chat, so if you like to, anyone else would like to do that, you can do that there, and then and spread the word about Sola, and all the work that Shabana and her team are doing. I think before we end, what I just want to say that we do have two more speakers, part of the Global Thought speakers. Tomorrow it's going to be Christoph van Mol is going to talk about study abroad, student mobility, and labor outcomes. And then on Monday, we end our Global Thought series with Majo Aldana. She's an education activist in Guatemala. And I think some of the themes that she's going to be talking about are very similar to what Shabana has been talking about in terms of having to provide education to girls in a very patriarchal system. So that would be Monday at 2:00 p.m. If you're interested, just go to our Abradia website and you can find the link there. Okay. Again, thank you very much, Shabana. I really appreciate this. Thank you to all the Allegheny College students for joining us. I appreciate that. Thank you, Hilla, my former Cuba student. It was great to see you. And thank you,
Likewise.
Jose, for joining us as well. Thank you very much. Again, thank you,
Thank you.
Shabana. Thank
Thank
you very
you
much,
all.
everyone.
Thank you. Have a
Thank
great
you.
day.
You too.
Bye.
Bye.